4 million years ago, our noble ancestors stood tall and strode across the African savanna on 2 feet, or so we thought. Now scientists are discovering that early man may have kept 1 foot on the ground and the other in the trees. In South Africa, the story of life is both ancient and profound. Not far from Johannesburg lies the vast network of underground caves of Sterkfontein. The Swana people have lived in this area for thousands of years. They believe these caves are the home of their ancestors, and contact with them through dance and song evokes magical healing powers. But to the rest of the world, these caves provide much more. They've given us a rare glimpse of an ape's first momentous steps towards becoming human. The fossil remains of a creature, part ape, part human, called Australopithecus, put Sterkfontein on the map and launched one of the longest-running debates in paleontology. If we descended from the apes, when did we abandon the trees and walk fully upright? Recent discoveries at Sterkfontein may provide the answer. Philip Tobias of the University of Witwatersrand is a world authority on human origins.
Well, anything new come out today?
Not yet, but we're still looking.
He spent most of his professional life looking for early man.
Well, I've been coming out here just over 50 years now, and in that time the site has grown from a small hole in the ground to a most extensive area as a result of our excavations. And it's proved in that time to be the world's richest single cave site for remains of early members of the family of man, or hominids as we call them. We've got close on 600 in the last 30 years, and we've got very nearly 1 million fossils of other animals that were living as contemporaries of the old ape men. So it is an extraordinarily rich site.
Today, Sterkfontein is the oldest continuous dig in the world. But a discovery 70 years ago first focused the limelight elsewhere in South Africa as the birthplace of humanity.
Well, it goes back to about 1925 when the first ever ape man was found at Taung in South Africa, at a time when the whole world believed that Asia had been the cradle of mankind.
That discovery was the skull of an Australopithecus child. While it had the face of an ape, its teeth and jaws were almost human. Never before had scientists seen one of our ancestors so closely related to the apes.
And this discovery, when it was assimilated into scientific thinking, made people switch the spotlight from Asia to Africa. And thereafter, a flood of discovery went right up the African continent, and more people became enthused by the search for our ancestors.
At his studio in Denver, Colorado, John Gertschy brings our ancestors back to life. Both a paleontologist and an artist, he's putting the finishing touches on his latest creation, a 3 million year old Australopithecus. John is using a cast of an original skull and his vast knowledge of anatomy to guide him. To build up the face, he has meticulously calculated where each muscle should go.
I had no preconceived idea of what this creature should look like. You could see indications of certain features on the skull clearly, but the result was a mystery till the end.
This is the oldest human ancestor John has created. To him, many of its features look more ape-like than human. Its sloping brow suggests its brain was only slightly bigger than a chimp's, and its ears sit further back on its head. Its nose is flattened, and its jaws thick to control the large muscles needed to cope with a diet rich in fiber, seeds, and raw meat. As John adds the final touches, he knows the creature unfolding before him must be very close to the one that lived long, long ago.
It's a very powerful experience for knowing that it has the weight of science behind it, and you can actually believe that this thing that's taking shape under your fingers is like the face that originally looked out on the landscape 3 million years ago.
The discovery of the Taung skull launched a frantic search for our ancestors across Africa. But without more of the body, one all-important question remained. Could Australopithecus stand on its own 2 feet? Then, in 1974, came a remarkable discovery. The skeleton of a female was found in Ethiopia, 500,000 years older than the Taung skull. She became known as Lucy.
Lucy was a fantastic find, a 40% complete skeleton. And before that, we had just bits and pieces of Australopithecines, an arm bone here, a thigh bone there. With Lucy, we found much of a skeleton, and we were able to, for the first time, look at body proportions. For example, this is an upper arm bone, this is a thigh bone from Lucy. And you can see that they're fairly close in size. With humans, the thigh bone is much longer.
From the length of her bones, scientists were able to judge that Lucy stood around 3.5 feet tall and weighed around 65 pounds. Although they found no feet, her leg bones revealed a lot about the way she moved.
If you take a chimp's thigh bone and put it on a table, the shaft will be pretty much straight up and down. You do the same thing with a human thigh bone, and it's angled off to one side. That's because our knees are engineered so that we can bring the leg in under the weight as we're walking on 2 legs. What you see in Lucy's thigh bone is very much a human-like angle. This tells us very clearly that this was a creature walking on 2 legs.
Ever since Lucy, we have envisioned Australopithecus striding across the African plains to begin the arduous trek towards becoming human. But 20 years later, that journey would be interrupted by the discovery of 4 tiny bones in a cardboard box. The search for fossils at Sterkfontein has been the passion of paleontologist Ron Clark for over a decade. But in August 1995, he was sorting through a box in his storeroom when he came across some extraordinary bones.
Well, I'd always thought that if I was going to make any exciting or dramatic discovery, it would be in our excavation outside. I little thought I'd make such a discovery in one of these dusty old boxes. But one day, I was looking through this box of mixed animal bones, and I picked out this one and thought, there's something very human about it. And then I realized that I was onto something very important.
Clark was right. The bones belonged to a young Australopithecus that was christened Littlefoot. The bones were nearly as old as Lucy's, which meant he had stumbled upon the oldest foot in the world. But it was no ordinary foot.
The first bone that I found, the ankle bone, was very human in form. But what was a surprise to me was that the succeeding 3 bones were more ape-like. And in particular, this last bone had a very mobile ape-like joint.
In a human foot, the big toe is rigid and aligned with the other toes. But Littlefoot's big toe was flexible and turned outward like a chimpanzee's. Flexible toes enable a chimpanzee to grip a branch with its feet, freeing its hands to swing through the trees. If Littlefoot could swing in the trees, how could Lucy have walked like a human? Although her skeleton was found without feet, Lucy's reputation as an upright walker rested firmly on the 1978 discovery of a remarkable set of footprints at Lake Toli in Tanzania. Here, 3 million years ago, 2 hominids walked through the ashfall of a nearby volcano. Moments later, more ash covered their tracks, preserving them like a snapshot in time.
Clearly, the Laetoli footprints indicate that Australopithecus was an upright walking hominid. But I don't agree that the footprints are fully human in form. And Littlefoot doesn't contradict this. Here's a reconstruction I made of Littlefoot with its divergent, grasping big toe. And if Littlefoot steps into one of the Laetoli prints, it makes a remarkable fit.
Looking at one of the footprints again, the telltale signs of a grasping big toe may have been there all along. If Ron Clark is right, our earliest ancestors had it both ways. They kept one foot in the trees and the other on the ground. The theory is radical, yet evidence to support it has arrived from an unexpected source. Another scientist is convinced it's not just our feet that do the walking, it's also our heads. A ballet dancer is a study in grace and impeccable balance. But for Fred Spoor, a Dutch anatomist with the University College of London, it's a miracle we can even stand up.
It's unbelievable that we as humans not fall over all the time. We have only small feet and we don't have a tail to keep our balance as a lot of other animals have. There's a whole complex of systems that allow us to do this. And part of these systems are these little canals, part of the inner ear, in which little sensors make sure that you can feel every movement you make with your head. And that allows us to stabilize our eyes in space and know exactly what we're doing with our body.
The organ of balance in an animal's inner ear is adapted to the way it moves. An orangutan can keep a steady eye on its surroundings even when the world is upside down. Of all the primates, humans are the only ones that walk on 2 legs. Because we live in an upright world, our organ of balance is distinctly different. Did Australopithecus swing through the trees like an ape, or walk like a man? Fred thinks the answer lies in the shape of its organ of balance. To find out, he used a famous discovery from Sterkfontein, a 2.5 million year old female Australopithecus named Mrs. Pless.
Well, there we go. It should be fine.
So we can really see the difference.
Fred teamed up with Frans Zonneveld of the University of Utrecht in Holland.
Around there.
When the skull is put through a CAT scanner, a series of images appears. By zeroing in on the inner ear, the images create a 3-dimensional picture of part of the organ of balance, the semicircular canals.
This here is clearly much more like an ape than like a modern human. So the information from the organ of balance of Australopithecus clearly suggests to me that they were, for a considerable period of the day, living in the trees rather than on the ground.
Like the discovery of Littlefoot, Fred's findings challenge one of our oldest beliefs about early man. It has long been assumed that the transition from the trees to the ground was triggered by a dramatic change in the climate. Forests gradually disappeared, giving way to the grasslands of the African savanna. To adapt to this hazardous new environment and successfully compete with fierce, four-legged predators that dominated the land, the ape man began walking fully upright. But this abiding image of our early ancestors is crumbling under the weight of more evidence from Sterkfontein. For Philip Tobias, the caves tell a gruesome, less heroic tale of life and death. Tobias has been looking at fossils of Australopithecus found near Littlefoot. Many bear the unmistakable imprint of carnivores' teeth. When Littlefoot was alive, predators similar to modern lions, hyenas, and leopards stalked the savanna, picking off the young and the sick. Now it seems the ape men were on the other side of the fence. Instead of being hunters, they were the hunted.
What we think probably happened is that these bones fell into the cave down a shaft, such as this, leading down from the surface. And possibly as a result of carnivore activities, some bits and pieces were dropped into the cave from the rather untidy table manners of the leopards. And as a result, we find pieces of limbs, like Littlefoot. Extraordinary phenomenon. We don't find that anywhere else to the same extent.
From hunters of prey to food for the predators, what is emerging is a life very different from the one we had imagined.
If you think of the whole of Africa as a kind of game reserve, without guns and without vehicles and without protection and fencing, and work out your chances of waking up alive in the morning, you would realize why life was so cheap in the time of Australopithecus. They died young. If you lived till 25, that was old age in Australopithecus.
Evidence from Sterkfontein raises another provocative question. Did Australopithecus fully abandon the forest for the savanna?
This is a painting I did 15 years ago of some early hominids standing in a savanna environment in Africa. Back then it was the perception that Australopithecines were living in such environments, and that indeed a savanna environment had a lot to do with the process of becoming human. Today we have new evidence that paints a little bit of a different picture.
Fossilized vines from an ancient forest have been found at Sterkfontein, suggesting the ape men could still have lived amongst the trees.
This painting, which I did last year, is more consistent with that evidence. It's not a simple transition in our thinking between an open environment and a forested environment. It's more a transition between a single environment idea and a very flexible animal that could live in a variety of habitats.
According to this new scenario, the forest didn't disappear when the climate changed. The trees simply grew further apart. As the distance between the trees and food increased, those who could cross the open spaces on two legs had a distinct advantage. The less time they spent on the ground, the less vulnerable they were to hungry predators. Looking back, it seems typically human that far from embracing a new way of life, our ancestors were only clinging to the old. For 2 decades, much of our image of the ape man has been based on the bones of a little lady, the nearly complete skeleton of Lucy. Now, workers at Sterkfontein have unearthed another skeleton that may have just as great an impact as Lucy. For another paleontologist from the University of Witwatersrand, Lee Berger, it's a skeleton with a difference.
Our new skeleton is different than the Lucy skeleton in that the Lucy skeleton from the neck down is more like that of a human. That is, it's got the proportions and body shape like a human, but from the neck up, it's more like that of a primitive ancestor, something like an early ape or the common ancestor. Our new skeleton, on the other hand, is just the opposite of that. It's got a more ape-like body, longer arms, shorter legs, less of an ability to walk like a human, but from the head up, The species which our skeleton belongs to has a more advanced head, something more closely related to the genus Homo.
The discovery is so new, it's known only as STW-431 for the map reference where it was found. But to see if a creature with the body of an ape could walk on two legs, Lee took a lesson from one of our cousins in the wild.
Most people don't realize that gibbons are actually the second bipedal ape in the world. We're the first. They're the second kind. They walk on two legs when they're on the ground. Our ancestors didn't walk like humans do. They almost certainly, because of the very long arms they had and relatively shorter legs than humans have, they had to walk much more like these gibbons, probably putting their arms out somewhat to balance and moving very rapidly from tree to tree as they were foraging in these forested environments.
If Lee's right, the ability to walk on two legs did not evolve in order to walk on the ground. The skill was already there in the trees.
These new fossils are indicating that the way in which they walked on two legs is extraordinarily different from the way in which humans walk on two legs, and maybe even the way in which Australopithecines in other parts of Africa walk on two legs.
We now know at least two very different creatures evolved, one in East Africa and one in South Africa. Which one is our ancestor, no one yet knows. But it now appears the ability to walk upright may have evolved not once, but twice. Walking upright has long been considered one of the hallmarks of humanity. Along with our big brain, it kindled the ingenuity to shape the world we live in. So perhaps now we must either redefine apes or redefine man.
I'm beginning to think that our traditional views of walking on two legs, or bipedalism, as defining humanity may be wrong.
Ever since Darwin, mankind has envisioned a single unique creature who began a slow but inexorable climb toward being human. Now we are finding the journey was far more complex.
The new fossil discoveries from South Africa are teaching us that we can no longer view human evolution as just a single ladder leading eventually to Homo sapiens. We have to view it more like this tree, where the Australopithecines lie at the very base of a branch that's very complex and eventually leads to us as just the last remaining tip of what was once a great tree of hominid evolution. And whether or not we go on from here, we've yet to see. We may stop, or we may branch out into another great tree.
What the future holds is uncertain, but the outcome may lie in the essence of who we are and where we came from.
Australopithecus was the great-great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandmother, not just of the people of Africa, but of all mankind over the face of the entire planet. If you want a scientific basis for the concept of the brotherhood of man, then I believe this is it, that we all shared a single common ancestry.
Well, when you talk about Australopithecines, you're talking about creatures that have taken the first step on the road to eventually the origin of conscious beings. When I look into this creature's eyes, I see a spark of humanity. This is a creature that's taken the first steps on the road to becoming human.